The radio crackled with static as Major General Harrison leaned back in his leather chair, cigar smoke curling toward the fluorescent lights of the Pentagon briefing room. "She'll wash out in 6 months," he muttered to Colonel Peterson, watching the personnel file slide across the mahogany table. The photograph showed a woman with steel-gray eyes and auburn hair pulled back in regulation fashion, her jaw set with quiet determination. Captain Valentina Viper Kozlov, recently transferred from the 354th Fighter Squadron after what the official reports diplomatically called interpersonal difficulties. "Sir, her flight scores are exceptional," Peterson ventured, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the metrics. "Top 5% in her class, distinguished graduate from—" "I don't care if she can fly sideways through a thunderstorm," Harrison interrupted, ash falling onto the deployment orders. "The A-10 program isn't some social experiment. Those warthogs require muscle, grit, and the kind of backbone that comes from growing up on a farm, not some fancy military academy." He jabbed his finger at her service record. "Look at this. Stanford undergraduate, parents both professors. Probably never had dirt under her fingernails until basic training." What the general couldn't know from the sanitized file before him, was that Valentina had earned her call sign not from some Hollywood bravado, but during a training exercise gone wrong over the Nevada desert. When her flight instructor suffered a cardiac episode at 15,000 feet, she'd taken control of their T-6 Texan II and talked him through his own rescue, flying one-handed while performing CPR compressions on his chest. The other cadets started calling her Viper after that, not for her strike capability, but for the way she'd moved with deadly precision when death itself had entered their cockpit. Now, 3 years later, she stood at the edge of Moody Air Force Base in Georgia, watching Thunderbolt II's taxi across the tarmac like predatory insects. Their distinctive twin engines mounted high on the fuselage gave them an almost alien appearance, while their titanium armor plating gleamed dully in the afternoon sun. These weren't the sleek fighters she'd trained on. These were flying tanks, ugly and purposeful, designed for one mission: close air support for ground troops in the most dangerous environments imaginable. Captain Rodriguez approached from behind, his flight suit already darkened with sweat despite the early hour. "You must be the new meat," he said, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "Hope you're ready to get your hands dirty, Academy. The hog doesn't forgive pretty flying." Valentina turned, her expression unreadable. "Neither do the troops on the ground, Sergeant," she replied quietly, emphasizing his enlisted origins with surgical precision. "Guess we'll find out who's really ready." The training compound buzzed with pre-dawn activity as Valentina completed her 4th week of A-10 conversion training. Unlike the pristine fighter jets she'd mastered, the Warthog felt like strapping yourself to a controlled explosion. Every system seemed designed by someone who'd never heard of elegance. Switches and gauges scattered across panels that looked like they'd been assembled by a committee of mechanics with a grudge against pilots. "Kozlov, you're up for close air support simulation," barked Master Sergeant Williams, clipboard in hand and skepticism written across his weathered face. "Grid reference Tango 77, troops in contact, danger close." He paused, studying her reaction. "Think your academy training covered reading smoke under pressure?" The simulation threw everything at her: malfunctioning radios, heavy cloud cover, and a scenario where friendly forces were pinned down less than 50 meters from enemy positions. Through her headset, the voice of the Joint Terminal Attack Controller crackled with barely controlled panic. "Viper 7-1, this is Groundhog 2-6. We need immediate suppression on the tree line 270 degrees from our position. We've got wounded and can't move." Banking her into a steep turn, Valentina felt the aircraft respond like a truck loaded with concrete. The General Electric GAU-8 cannon mounted in the nose contained enough firepower to shred a main battle tank, but accuracy demanded patience and precision that her previous aircraft had never required. "Groundhog 2-6, Viper 7-1, I have your position marked. Confirm your distance from target area." 50 meters, maybe less. They've got us zeroed. We need you now. Below, the training ground sprawled in realistic detail. Mock buildings, vehicle hulks, and mannequins positioned to simulate urban warfare. But Valentina saw beyond the simulation. In her mind, those were real soldiers, real blood seeping into real dirt. Her thumb hovered over the cannon trigger as she aligned her approach, feeling the slight buffet as her speed decreased to attack velocity. "Guns, guns, guns," she called over the radio, squeezing the trigger. The GAU-8 erupted with its distinctive sound, a deep, resonant growl that seemed to tear the air itself. 30mm depleted uranium rounds streamed toward the target at over 3,000 rounds per minute, each one capable of punching through 6 inches of steel. The tree-line simulation exploded in controlled pyrotechnics as her rounds found their mark. "Outstanding suppression, Viper 7-1, came the JTAC's relieved voice. "Target neutralized. You saved our bacon down here." As she climbed away from the target area, Valentina caught sight of the observation tower where instructors evaluated student performance. Through her peripheral vision, she noticed several figures in the tower turning to speak animatedly among themselves. She couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language had shifted from casual observation to focused attention. Later in debriefing, Captain Rodriguez sat quietly in the back row while Master Sergeant Williams reviewed her performance metrics. Time on target, textbook, accuracy within acceptable parameters, communication clear and professional. He paused, consulting his notes. Overall assessment, satisfactory progression. But his tone carried something that hadn't been there before, a grudging note of respect that he tried to keep buried beneath his professional demeanor. The mess hall conversation died as Valentina entered, carrying her regulation tray toward an empty table near the windows. 27 pairs of eyes tracked her movement, most belonging to pilots who'd been flying A-10s since before she'd graduated college. The silence stretched until Lieutenant Palmer, known throughout the squadron for his inability to keep his opinions to himself, decided to fill the void. "Heard Academy had a good day in the simulator," he said loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "Must be nice when the bad guys can't shoot back, right?" A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the assembled pilots, but most kept eating, sensing the undercurrent of something more serious than routine hazing. Valentina set down her tray and looked directly at Palmer. "You're right, Lieutenant. Simulators don't prepare you for the real weight of someone else's life in your hands." Her voice carried across the mess hall with quiet authority. "They don't teach you how it feels when you're the only thing standing between American soldiers and a body bag. But then again, most of us won't know that feeling until we're downrange." Master Sergeant Williams entered the mess hall at that moment, scanning the room until his eyes found Valentina. "Kozlov, Colonel Morrison wants to see you in his office." Now, the way he said it suggested this wasn't a social visit. Colonel Morrison's office reflected 30 years of military service, commendations, unit patches, and photographs of aircraft spanning decades of conflicts. Behind his desk, a large window overlooked the flight line where A-10s sat in neat rows, their gray paint schemes designed to blend into the lethal confusion of close air support missions. "Captain Kozlov, I've been reviewing your training reports," Morrison began, settling into his chair with the deliberate movements of a man who'd learned to measure his words carefully. "Your technical proficiency is beyond question. Your tactical judgment shows maturity beyond your experience level, but I'm concerned about something else entirely." Valentina remained at attention, her expression neutral. "Sir." "Integration with your fellow pilots," Morrison continued, leaning forward. "The A-10 community is different from the fighter world you came from. We're not lone wolves pulling 9GS and chasing glory. Every mission we fly, every trigger we pull, is about supporting troops on the ground. That requires trust, not just in your own abilities but in the pilot flying next to you." He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "General Harrison called me yesterday. wanted to know how his social experiment was progressing. Morrison's voice carried a note of disgust at the phrase. I told him something that might surprise you, Captain. I told him that in 28 years of flying and instructing, I've rarely seen a pilot with your combination of technical skill and tactical instinct. Sir, I appreciate. Morrison raised a hand, cutting her off. I wasn't finished. I also told him that none of that matters if you can't earn the trust of your squadron mates. Because when the shooting starts, when American lives hang in the balance, we don't fly solo missions. We fly as a team, and teams require mutual respect. The 6-week mark of training arrived with autumn weather systems rolling across Georgia, bringing low clouds and gusty winds that made every landing an exercise in controlled violence. Valentina found herself paired with Captain Rodriguez for a 2-ship formation exercise, the first time she'd flown with a partner since arriving at Moody. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same pilot who'd questioned her readiness on day one was now responsible for her continued progression. Viper 7-1, Badger 7-2 were cleared for takeoff. Rodriguez's voice came through her headset with professional courtesy that hadn't been there weeks earlier. Weather's calling for moderate turbulence and scattered thunderstorms. Stay tight on the join-up. Their A-10s rolled down the runway in sequence, the distinctive whine of their twin TF-34 engines building to a crescendo before rotating into the gray morning sky. Unlike sleek fighters that seemed to leap from the earth, the Warthogs climbed with determined persistence, trading elegance for the kind of reliability that ground troops could stake their lives on. The exercise scenario placed them in support of a Marine rifle company under heavy fire near a contested urban area. Their target package included multiple buildings where enemy forces had established interlocking fields of fire, but the Marines were positioned close enough to friendly structures that precision became paramount. One misplaced round could turn allies into casualties. Viper 7-1, this is Groundhog 3-2. The JTAC's voice carried the controlled tension of someone calling in danger-close fire support. We need immediate suppression on Building 7, but be advised, we have friendly forces in Building 5, approximately 75 meters to the east. Banking into her attack run, Valentina felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders like a lead blanket. Through her targeting pod, she could see the mock urban environment spread below, realistic enough to make her pulse quicken, artificial enough to remind her that mistakes here were learning opportunities rather than tragedies. Badger 7-2, Viper 7-1, I'm in from the south. Confirm your position on Building 5 before I'm cleared hot. Rodriguez's A-10 appeared in her peripheral vision, offset by several hundred meters to provide mutual support while maintaining safe separation. Groundhog 3-2, Badger 7-2 has visual on the friendlies. Confirm they're displaying orange smoke for identification. Affirmative, orange smoke deployed. You're cleared hot on Building 7. Valentina lined up her cannon run, feeling the aircraft respond to her control inputs like a familiar partner in a deadly dance. The GAU-8 cannon had become extension of her will, its massive barrel designed to deliver precisely measured destruction. But as her crosshairs settled on the target, she noticed something that made her blood freeze. The wind patterns had shifted since the exercise began, carrying the orange identification smoke eastward across her intended target area. What should have been clear target identification had become a potentially lethal confusion of markers. Abort, abort, she called over the radio, pulling her aircraft into a climbing turn away from the target. Badger 7-2, Viper 7-1 is aborting attack run. Smoke markers have drifted, cannot confirm target distinction. The radio silence that followed stretched for several heartbeats before Rodriguez's voice returned, carrying a note of something that sounded almost like admiration. Groundhog 3-2, Badger 7-2 confirms smoke drift. Request fresh marking before continuing attack. After landing and debriefing, Captain Rodriguez approached Valentina near the squadron operations building. For the first time since her arrival, his expression carried no trace of skepticism or condescension. "That abort call," he said without preamble. 90% of pilots would have taken that shot and sorted out the details later. He extended his hand in a gesture that carried the weight of acceptance. "Welcome to the Hog Driver's Viper." The call came at 3:47 hours on a Tuesday morning in December, jerking Valentina from deep sleep with its urgent electronic pulse. Colonel Morrison's voice on the secure line carried none of its usual measured cadence. This was the tone of a commander whose entire world had just shifted into a higher gear. "Captain Kozlov, report to squadron operations immediately. We have a developing situation in Syria, and you're on the deployment roster." No pleasantries, no context, just the stark reality of military orders delivered in darkness. "Bring your go bag and be prepared for extended deployment." The operations building hummed with activity despite the early hour. Maps of the Middle East covered every available wall surface, marked with colored pins and acetate overlays that told the story of a complex tactical situation. Valentina recognized the signs. Intelligence updates flowing in real time, logistics coordinators working phones with transportation commands, and the particular brand of controlled chaos that preceded military deployment. "Gentlemen, ladies, listen up," Colonel Morrison announced as the assembled pilots settled into folding chairs arranged in rough rows. 48 hours ago, ISIS forces overran a Syrian Democratic Forces position near Al-Hasaka. They're holding approximately 200 civilians hostage in a school complex, using them as human shields while they consolidate their position. The briefing slides clicked through satellite imagery showing a compound that looked depressingly similar to their training scenarios, except these buildings contained real children, real teachers, real families caught in the crossfire of someone else's war. Valentina felt her stomach tighten as she studied the aerial photographs, noting the defensive positions that terrorist forces had established around the perimeter. "Coalition forces have established a cordon around the area, but the rules of engagement are about as restrictive as they get," Morrison continued. "No indirect fire, no high-explosive munitions within 500 meters of the school buildings. Everything has to be precision-guided, surgeon-precise, and personally verified by eyes on target." Captain Rodriguez leaned forward in his seat. "Sir, what about civilian casualties? If these tangos are using kids as shields?" "That's exactly why we're deploying A-10s instead of fast movers," Morrison replied grimly. "The Warthog's cannon gives us the precision we need and the loiter time to wait for clean shots. But make no mistake, this mission profile is going to test everything you've learned about close air support." The deployment timeline moved with the mechanical precision of a military machine designed for rapid response. Within 6 hours, their squadron's A-10s were loaded aboard C-5 Galaxy transport aircraft, their wings folded, and engines secured for the transatlantic journey to Incirlik Air Base in Turkey. Valentina sat in the cargo bay's passenger seating, listening to the Galaxy's 4 massive engines drone through the night sky while she reviewed targeting protocols and rules of engagement. Lieutenant Palmer, who'd gradually evolved from antagonist to grudging ally over the preceding months, occupied the seat across from her. "Nervous?" he asked, his own tension visible in the way his hands moved restlessly across his flight suit. "Focused," Valentina replied, continuing to study her mission materials. "Nervous doesn't help anyone when there are 200 civilians depending on us to get it right the first time." Master Sergeant Williams made his way through the cargo bay, checking on his pilots with the paternal attention of someone who'd shepherded dozens of aviators through their first combat deployments. When he reached Valentina, he settled into the empty seat beside her with a grunt that spoke of too many years carrying too much equipment. "First time downrange?" he asked, though her service record had already provided the answer. "Yes, Sergeant." Williams nodded thoughtfully. Combat flying isn't like the simulators, Captain. It's not even like the advanced training scenarios. When you're looking through that targeting pod and you know there are real people down there, enemy and friendly, everything changes. The weight of it, the responsibility. Some pilots freeze up. Others get trigger happy. The good ones find that sweet spot where training takes over and emotions stay in check. The C-5 Galaxy touched down at Incirlik Air Base 18 hours after departure, its massive tires smoking against Turkish tarmac as the pilot executed a textbook landing despite crosswinds that would have challenged smaller aircraft. Within minutes, ground crews were positioning aircraft tugs and preparing to offload the squadron's A-10s for reassembly and systems checks. Valentina stepped off the aircraft into air that carried unfamiliar scents, dust, jet fuel, and something indefinable that marked this place as definitively not home. The operational tempo at Incirlik moved faster than anything she'd experienced during training, with aircraft launching and recovering around the clock in support of ongoing coalition operations throughout the region. Viper 7-1, welcome to the sandbox, called Major Stevens, the squadron's operations officer, as he approached with a folder thick enough to suggest her easy days were officially over. Hope you got some sleep on the transport, because we're wheels up in 6 hours for your first combat mission. The intelligence briefing took place in a windowless room where multiple computer screens displayed real-time surveillance footage from the hostage situation. Valentina watched grainy video feeds showing children visible through classroom windows, their faces turned upward toward unfamiliar aircraft sounds that had become part of their daily reality over the past week. Current situation, began Captain Martinez from the intelligence section, his laser pointer dancing across projected imagery. Approximately 40 ISIS fighters have fortified positions throughout the school complex. They're using the civilian hostages as human shields, positioning them near windows and doorways to complicate any rescue attempt. The tactical complexity became clear as Martinez walked through the intelligence picture. Coalition ground forces had established observation posts at safe distances, but direct assault remained impossible due to the civilian presence. Air support would be crucial, but every engagement would require precise timing and surgical accuracy that pushed both aircraft and aircrew to their absolute limits. Your mission tomorrow, Martinez continued, focusing his attention on Valentina, is to provide close air support for a Special Forces reconnaissance team that's going to attempt to establish better observation positions. They need overwatch while they move to within 200 meters of the target area. Rodriguez shifted in his seat. Rules of engagement. Weapons tight unless specifically cleared by ground control. No engagement of any target within 500 meters of confirmed civilian positions unless there's immediate threat to American forces. And everything, has to be confirmed by at least 2 sources before you're cleared to engage. That night, Valentina lay in her bunk listening to the distant sound of aircraft operations continuing through the Turkish darkness. Tomorrow would mark her first combat mission, the culmination of years of training and months of preparation. But unlike the confident anticipation she'd expected to feel, her primary emotion was a deep sense of responsibility for the lives that would depend on her decisions in the hours ahead. The pre-dawn briefing room felt different from those training sessions back at Moody Air Force Base. The stakes had weight now, measured in lives rather than training scores. Valentina sat with her flight lead, Major Chen, reviewing mission materials by the harsh light of fluorescent bulbs that turned everyone's face the color of old paper. Their A-10s waited on the ramp outside, loaded with a mixed complement of precision-guided munitions and 30mm armor-piercing rounds. Weather's calling for clear skies and light winds, Major Chen reported, consulting the meteorological briefing. Visibility unlimited, which is good news for target identification but bad news for concealment. The tangos will see us coming from 20 miles out. Their mission profile required a delicate balance of intimidation and restraint. The Special Forces team needed air support aggressive enough to discourage enemy action, but precise enough to avoid collateral damage that could turn a hostage rescue into a massacre. Every trigger pull would be scrutinized by lawyers, politicians, and history itself. Viper 7-1, your station will be at 15,000 feet offset to the north, Chen continued. That gives you optimal angle for cannon runs if needed, while keeping you outside the range of small arms fire. But remember, we're not here to level buildings. We're here to provide precise, measured responses to immediate threats. The walk to their aircraft felt longer than usual, weighted by the knowledge that training had ended and operational flying had begun. Ground crews performed final inspections with extra attention to detail, understanding that maintenance issues downrange carried consequences beyond mistraining objectives. Valentina ran through her pre-flight inspection with mechanical precision, but her mind kept drifting to the surveillance footage of children's faces pressed against classroom windows. Tower, Viper 7-1 flight of 2, ready for taxi. Major Chen's voice carried across the radio frequency as their engines spooled up to operating temperature. The familiar routine of radio calls and checklist items provided a comforting structure, but Valentina could feel her pulse quickening as they approached the runway threshold. Their takeoff sequence proceeded normally until they reached cruising altitude and began their transit toward Syrian airspace. At that moment, reality crystallized into sharp focus. They were no longer training pilots learning to employ weapons systems, but combat aviators responsible for supporting American forces in contact with hostile enemies. The transformation felt both sudden and inevitable. Viper 7-1, contact Overlord Control on frequency 247.4, came the air traffic controller's voice, directing them toward the tactical frequency that would coordinate their mission activities. Good hunting. The flight south toward Al-Hasaka took 35 minutes, during which Valentina watched the landscape below transition from Turkish agricultural areas to Syrian territory marked by the scars of ongoing conflict. Burned-out vehicle hulks dotted the highways, while villages showed the distinctive patterns of war damage, collapsed buildings, cratered roads, and the kind of emptiness that spoke of populations fled or killed. Overlord Control, Viper 7-1 flight checking in, 2 A-10s with mixed ordnance, playtime 3 hours. Major Chen reported as they entered their assigned patrol area. Viper 7-1, Overlord Control, welcome to the party. Stand by for updates from Groundhog 2-1. The Special Forces team's radio operator came online with the kind of calm professionalism that suggested extensive combat experience. Viper 7-1, Groundhog 2-1, we're beginning our approach to the observation position. Request you maintain high station and keep your eyes open for any movement around the target area. Through her targeting pod, Valentina could see the school complex spread below like a tactical puzzle demanding solution. The main building showed obvious signs of fortification. Windows blocked with furniture, defensive positions established at corners and doorways, and the ominous stillness that suggested hidden watchers tracking every movement in the surrounding area. Viper 7-1, Groundhog 2-1, we have movement. Multiple personnel exiting the north side of the target building. Appears to be a patrol establishing outer security. Valentina adjusted her targeting pod focus, watching as figures in dark clothing moved with tactical discipline away from the school buildings. Through her high-resolution camera, she could distinguish weapons, equipment, and movement patterns that suggested military training rather than civilian activity. Groundhog 2-1, Viper 7-1 has visual on your movement. Count approximately 8 personnel with assault rifles, establishing positions along the northern tree line. The tactical situation developed with the inexorable momentum of military operations conducted under pressure. ISIS forces had detected something, whether the approaching Special Forces team or simply increased coalition air activity, and were responding with countermeasures designed to complicate any rescue attempt. Viper 7-1, Groundhog 2-1 were taking effective small arms fire from multiple positions. Request immediate close air support on the northern tree line, danger close, troops in contact. The radio call that every close air support pilot trains for and hopes never to hear had just crackled through Valentina's headset. Below, American Special Forces operators were under direct enemy fire, their lives dependent on her ability to deliver precise munitions within meters of their position. Training scenarios had prepared her for the technical aspects of danger-close fire support, but nothing could have prepared her for the weight of knowing that real lives hung in the balance of her next few decisions. Groundhog 2-1, Viper 7-1, confirm your position and distance to target, she responded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Through her targeting pod, she could see muzzle flashes winking from the northern tree line where ISIS fighters had established positions designed to interdict any approach to the school complex. Viper 7-1, we're at grid November Kilo 476823. Targets are approximately 150 meters north of our position. We have wounded and cannot displace. Major Chen's voice came through the flight frequency. Viper 7-1, you're cleared to engage. I'll maintain high cover and coordinate with Overlord control. Banking her into an attack profile, Valentina felt the aircraft respond with the familiar heavy authority of a weapons system designed for exactly this mission. The GAU-8 cannon could deliver precise fires at distances that kept her outside the range of small arms fire, but accuracy demanded perfect coordination between airspeed, altitude, and target tracking. Guns, 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 she called over the radio, squeezing the trigger as her crosshairs settled on the tree-line positions. The cannon's distinctive roar filled her cockpit while 30-millimeter rounds streamed toward targets that had, moments before, been directing effective fire at American forces. The results were immediate and decisive. Through her targeting pod, she watched as the muzzle flashes from enemy positions ceased, replaced by secondary explosions that suggested ammunition storage areas had been hit. Groundhog 2-1, Viper 7-1, how copy my last gun run? Outstanding effects, Viper 7-1. Enemy fire has ceased, we can move to treat casualties. That was danger close done right. But even as tactical success unfolded below, Valentina's attention was drawn to movement around the school building itself. Through her high-resolution camera, she could see figures in ISIS black moving civilian hostages, including what appeared to be children, into positions near windows and doorways. The message was clear. Any attempt to assault the building would result in civilian casualties that the terrorists would blame on coalition forces. Overlord control, Viper 7-1. Be advised that enemy forces are repositioning civilian hostages as human shields around the target building. This significantly complicates any direct action. Copy, Viper 7-1. Continue to provide overwatch while Groundhog 2-1 establishes their observation post. Higher headquarters is coordinating additional assets for what looks like an extended situation. The mission continued for another 2 hours, during which Valentina maintained station above the tactical area, while the Special Forces team established concealed positions that would allow continuous surveillance of the school complex. Her fuel state eventually required return to Incirlik, but the intelligence gathered during their patrol would prove crucial for planning the eventual rescue operation. During post-mission debriefing, Major Chen reviewed her performance with the kind of professional assessment that carried weight beyond training evaluations. Textbook danger close support, he concluded. The ground team specifically requested you for future missions based on today's performance. That night, Valentina sat in her quarters writing a letter she would never send, trying to process the reality that her decisions had directly saved American lives while potentially affecting the fate of 200 civilian hostages. Combat flying, she was learning, involved moral complexities that no training scenario could adequately simulate. The second mission briefing took place 72 hours later in the same windowless room where intelligence updates had been flowing around the clock. The situation at the school complex had evolved into what military planners euphemistically called a dynamic target environment. ISIS forces were using their civilian hostages as both shields and psychological weapons, while coalition forces struggled to develop rescue options that wouldn't result in mass casualties. Updated intelligence indicates approximately 40 enemy fighters now occupy the complex, Captain Martinez reported, his laser pointer highlighting new defensive positions that had appeared on the satellite imagery. They've established interlocking fields of fire, integrated air defense positions, and most significantly, they've been executing civilian hostages at a rate of approximately 5 per day. The photographs that followed were difficult to view, bodies in civilian clothing positioned where coalition surveillance assets would detect them, each death clearly intended to send a message about the consequences of any rescue attempt. Valentina felt her jaw tighten as she studied imagery that transformed abstract tactical challenges into personal moral imperatives. Your mission today, Martinez continued, focusing on her and Major Chen, is to provide close air support for a Delta Force reconnaissance element that's going to attempt to establish better observation positions. Intelligence believes we can identify the specific rooms where hostages are being held, which would enable more precise rescue planning. The tactical picture had become increasingly complex over the past 3 days. ISIS forces had learned from the previous Special Forces probe, establishing early warning positions and reaction forces designed to detect and counter any coalition approach to the school building. More problematically, they had begun moving hostages regularly between rooms, making it impossible to guarantee civilian safety during any assault. Rules of engagement remain weapons tight, Martinez emphasized. But command authority recognizes that American forces in immediate danger take priority over broader tactical considerations. If our people are about to be overrun, you're cleared to engage with whatever force is necessary to preserve American lives. Major Chen leaned forward in his seat. What about the hostages, if we have to choose between saving Americans and protecting civilians? That's above our pay grade, Martinez replied grimly. Higher headquarters is working diplomatic channels while we handle the tactical situation. Our job is to support American forces and gather intelligence that might enable a successful rescue operation. The pre-flight briefing covered weather conditions that had deteriorated since their last mission, scattered clouds at 8,000 feet, with afternoon thunderstorms forecast for the target area. More concerning were intelligence reports indicating that ISIS forces had acquired what appeared to be man-portable air defense systems, shoulder-fired missiles that could threaten low-flying aircraft. Threat assessment indicates possible A-10 or similar systems, the intelligence officer reported. Effective range approximately 10,000 feet, heat-seeking guidance. Recommend maintaining altitude above 15,000 feet unless tactical situation requires lower approach. Their A-10s launched into weather that matched the tactical complexity of their mission, partially cloudy skies that provided concealment opportunities while complicating target identification. Valentina flew as wingman to Major Chen, maintaining tactical formation while they transited toward the target area where American Special Forces were preparing for another high-risk reconnaissance mission. Overlord Control, Viper 7-1 flight checking in, 2 A-10s with mixed ordnance, playtime 4 hours, Major Chen reported as they entered Syrian airspace. Viper 7-1, Overlord Control, welcome back. Be advised, Groundhog 2-5 is approximately 30 minutes from insertion. Stand by for tactical updates. The landscape below showed increasing signs of conflict as they approached Al-Hasaka, vehicle convoys moving along roads that zigzagged to avoid known ambush sites, defensive positions established around key infrastructure, and the distinctive pattern of civilian displacement that marked active combat zones. Through her targeting pod, Valentina could see the school complex appearing exactly as intelligence had predicted. New defensive positions had been established since their last mission, with heavy weapons emplacements positioned to cover all approaches to the building. More disturbing were the figures visible in upper-story windows, civilians positioned where they would be clearly visible to coalition surveillance, their presence serving as a constant reminder of the human cost that any assault would entail. Viper 7-1, Groundhog 2-5, we're beginning our approach. Request you maintain high station and report any movement around the target area. The Delta Force team's approach took 45 minutes, during which Valentina watched ISIS forces demonstrate the kind of tactical discipline that made them particularly dangerous opponents. Sentries rotated on precise schedules, communication systems operated continuously, and reaction forces remained positioned for rapid deployment to any threatened sector. Groundhog 2-5, Viper 7-1. Be advised I'm tracking movement of approximately 12 personnel from the main building toward your planned observation position. The tactical situation was developing faster than planned, with ISIS forces responding to indicators that most insurgent groups would have missed. Their professionalism suggested military training and combat experience that exceeded typical terrorist capabilities, making them particularly dangerous opponents for conventional forces. Viper 7-1, Groundhog 2-5 were compromised. Taking effective fire from multiple positions, request immediate close air support danger close. The call that every pilot hopes to avoid and trains constantly to handle had just exploded through Valentina's headset. Below, elite American operators were fighting for their lives against enemy forces, positioned less than 200 meters from civilian hostages whose fate hung in the balance of every decision made in the next few minutes. The radio calls came in rapid sequence, each one adding complexity to a tactical situation that was spiraling toward decisions no pilot should have to make. Viper 7-1, Groundhog 2-5, we have 2 wounded, cannot move, enemy forces massing for assault on our position. The Delta Force team leader's voice carried professional calm despite circumstances that would have broken lesser operators. Through her targeting pod, Valentina could see muzzle flashes erupting from multiple positions around the school complex as ISIS fighters concentrated fire on the Special Forces team's concealed position. But her crosshairs also revealed civilians pressed against classroom windows, their faces clearly visible through her high-resolution camera system. Children, teachers, and families caught in the crossfire of someone else's war. Groundhog 2-5, Viper 7-1, confirm your exact position and distance to nearest civilian structures, she responded, banking into an attack profile while fighting to maintain the professional detachment that precise weapons employment required. Grid, November Kilo 478147. Civilians are in the main school building approximately 200 meters to our south. Enemy forces are in the courtyard and northern classroom wing. Major Chen's voice cut through the tactical frequency. Viper 7-1, you're cleared hot. I'll coordinate with higher and maintain overwatch. The mathematics of close air support had become brutally clear. ISIS fighters were using the school's architecture to shield their assault on American forces, positioning themselves where any effective engagement would risk civilian casualties. But American operators were dying below, their lives dependent on her willingness to accept risks that would haunt her regardless of the outcome. Guns, 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 she called, squeezing the cannon trigger as her crosshairs settled on enemy positions in the school courtyard. The GAU-8's 30mm rounds streamed toward targets that had been directing effective fire at American forces, each impact creating secondary explosions that suggested ammunition storage areas. Through her targeting pod, she watched the immediate effects of her engagement. Enemy muzzle flashes ceased in the targeted area, but movement in the classroom windows increased as civilians reacted to the sudden violence erupting around their confined space. Faces appeared and disappeared at windows, some curious, others terrified.